There is a kind of dreaming that happens before life teaches you otherwise. It happens in the quiet places, in the corner bedroom of a small house in a small town, where a girl named Jessica once pressed her face to a cold window pane and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one, like tiny promises being lit for the night. She was the kind of girl who believed in those promises. She was the kind of girl who deserved to. She was 21 years old when she first saw Alex. Not in a movie, not in the pages of a book, but in the realest, most ordinary way, the way love always arrives when it means to stay. He was tall, with laughter that came easily, and plans that tumbled out of him like he could not contain them. Little dates, small adventures, walks that turned into hours, words whispered under streetlights that felt like vows before they were ever spoken formally. Jessica did not guard herself against him. Why would she? He was warmth in a world she had always found a little cold. He was motion in a life she had always feared would stay still. When he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt, perhaps for the first time, entirely seen. She had a dream, as most young women do. Not a complicated dream, not a grand theatrical vision of wealth or fame or power, just the simple ancient dream that has sustained human hearts across every generation. A home, a family, a man who stayed, children who laughed, dinners that grew cold because everyone was too busy talking. The quiet, sacred dignity of an ordinary life lived fully. She and Alex talked about children once, the way couples do when they are still new to each other, cautiously, warmly, as if testing the weight of the future together. He had nodded, smiled, said the right things, or close enough to the right things that she allowed herself to believe them. Also used this place where Jessica lived was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and your grandmother's name, and probably your grandmother's secrets too. It was the kind of place that could feel both like a comfort and a cage, depending on which day you found yourself living in. For Jessica, in those early days with Alex, it felt like the whole world, small, safe, entirely sufficient. And so she dreamed, and so she loved, and so she let herself believe that the life she had imagined was not only possible, it was coming. It was almost here. It was just around the next corner. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that some corners do not lead where you expect. Some corners open onto darkness. Some corners are the last moments of one life before a completely different one begins, without warning, without ceremony, without mercy. She was 24 years old when she found out she was pregnant. She stood in the bathroom, holding the small plastic test with both hands, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. And the feeling that moved through her in that moment, that trembling, terrified, radiant, overwhelming feeling, was not dread. It was joy, pure, unguarded, completely undefended joy. She went to find Alex. She was smiling,
She was ready to begin. She did not know, as she walked toward him with that smile and that news and that enormous trusting heart,
she did not know that she was about to step off the edge of everything she thought she knew. She did not know that the dream was ending. She did not know that something far harder and far more real was about to begin. There is a particular kind of silence that is louder than any sound. It is the silence that falls after someone says something that cannot be unsaid. It is the silence that follows the collapse of a world that looked from the outside completely intact. Jessica watched Alex's face as she told him. She watched the warmth drain from it like water left tipped too long on the edge of a table. She watched something flicker behind his eyes, fear, perhaps, or calculation, or something colder than either of those things. A kind of withdrawal so swift and total it was almost mechanical. He froze. That is the only word for what happened to him. He froze, and in that freezing, something between them, something that Jessica had believed was permanent, had built her future upon, had trusted with the most intimate parts of herself, cracked clean through. "I love you," he said. And he probably meant it. Love is not the same thing as courage. Love is not the same thing as readiness. Love is not, it turns out, the same thing as staying. But I'm not father material. 5 words, 11 syllables, an entire life unmade. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She was Jessica. And Jessica had been taught, the way most women are taught, to hold herself upright, even when the ground gives way beneath her. She held herself upright. He was gone within a month. Not in a dramatic scene, not with a shouted argument or a slammed door or the cathartic violence of a proper ending. He simply withdrew. One day he was there, and then he was less there, and then he was not there at all. The apartment that had once held both of their lives gradually emptied of him, quietly, efficiently, like a tide going out. No goodbye, just silence. Silence where his voice used to be. Silence where his laugh had lived. Silence in the space beside her in the bed, in the chair across the breakfast table, in the passenger seat of her car on Sunday mornings. The silence of absence is a specific and terrible thing. It does not feel like nothing. It feels like something has been removed so forcibly that the shape of it remains, aching in everything it used to fill. Jessica was 24 years old. She was pregnant, and she was alone. She moved to her sister's house. There is grace in the world sometimes. There is grace in the people who open their doors without requiring you to explain yourself, without demanding that you perform your gratitude in ways you do not have the energy to perform. Her sister was that grace. Quiet, steady, practical grace. The kind that shows up not with speeches, but with a spare room and grocery bags, and a hand on your shoulder in the middle of the night when the crying starts, and you cannot explain exactly why. Jessica lay in that spare room in the dark and thought about everything. She thought about the dream, the house, the family, the man who stayed. She thought about how certain she had been. She thought about the way certainty can feel like knowledge, and how it is not the same thing at all. She thought about the child growing inside her, already real, already hers, already depending on her completely. And in the dark of that spare room, alone with the silence Alex had left behind, Jessica made a decision. It was not a loud decision. It was not a triumphant decision. It was not the kind of decision that announces itself with trumpets or resolve or the clean confidence of someone who knows how everything turns out. It was quiet, and it was terrified, and it was hers. She decided to stay. Not for Alex, not for the dream that was already dissolving, not even yet for the child she had not yet held. She decided to stay for herself, the version of herself that was still here, the version of herself that had not left. She pressed her hands to her stomach. She breathed in the darkness. She did not know how she was going to do this. She did not know what was coming. She did not know yet who she was becoming. But she was still here, and in the wreckage of a dream, sometimes that is everything. He came early, as if he had already decided, even before drawing his first breath, that waiting was not his style. As if the world beyond that warm, dark shelter was simply too interesting to delay any longer. He arrived before the world was ready for him, which, if you think about it, describes every extraordinary person who has ever lived. The doctors used words like premature. They used words like small. They used clinical language designed to manage expectation and prepare parents for difficulty. Measured, careful language that does not quite capture what it means to look down at a child who fits in the curve of your single arm and understand with a certainty that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to the bone that you would walk through fire for this person. Jessica named him Caleb. She held him for the first time and felt the smallness of him, the shocking, impossible smallness, and beneath it, the insistence of him, the grip, the way his tiny fingers curled around hers with a ferocity completely disproportionate to his size, the way he breathed, labored and determined, like someone already practicing the art of not giving up. Small, but strong. Those two words would follow Caleb through the early months of his life, offered by nurses and doctors and specialists with cautious smiles and carefully modulated hope. And every time someone said them, Jessica would nod and feel, beneath the fear and the exhaustion and the weight of everything she was doing alone, a fierce and private recognition. Small, but strong. She could have said the same about herself. In the weeks and months after Caleb's birth, Jessica discovered something about herself that the previous 24 years had not fully revealed. She was, at her core, made of something that does not break. She worked nights at the warehouse.
8 hours on a concrete floor, under fluorescent lights, moving through the physical labor of it with the methodical focus of someone who has decided that thinking too hard about the larger picture is a luxury she cannot currently afford. Her back ached in ways that woke her from sleep. Her eyes burned from the light and the lack of rest. Her hands grew rough in ways that the hands of 24-year-old women are not supposed to grow rough. She came home at dawn and slept while her sister watched Caleb. She woke in the afternoon and became entirely his mother.
Not a tired woman returning from a night shift, not a single parent running calculations in her head about rent and formula and whether the checking account would survive the week, but Caleb's mother, present, attentive, there. She read to him, she sang to him, she carried him to the window and showed him the world outside, the yard, the sky, the birds in the tree by the fence, and narrated it with the lavish enthusiasm of a tour guide showing someone around the most wondrous place on earth, because to Caleb it was. She watched him change. The milestones came slower than they come for some children, and Jessica held her breath through each waiting, each setback, each consultation with the specialists who measured and assessed and carefully did not promise things they could not guarantee. She held her breath, and she held Caleb, and she kept going. And then he took his first steps. She could tell you exactly where she was standing. She could tell you exactly what the light was doing through the window that afternoon, exactly what she had in her hands when it happened, exactly the sound he made, a kind of gleeful, astonished grunt, as if the discovery of locomotion was the single greatest thing that had ever occurred to him.
He wobbled. He pitched forward. He caught himself. He looked up at her with eyes that were wide and delighted and completely certain that she was watching. She was watching. The exhaustion was still there, the aching back, the burning eyes, the weight of everything was still there. It did not disappear. But it became, in that moment, entirely unimportant. It became backdrop. It became the context for something else entirely. The most important thing, the only thing that truly mattered. Her son, upright and moving and alive and looking at her with those eyes that trusted her completely. She forgot everything else. She had not known before Caleb that a person could be so thoroughly remade by love. She had felt love before, had felt it for Alex, for her sister, for her parents, for the dream she had carried so carefully for so many years. But this was different. This was the love that does not arrive as a feeling so much as a restructuring. The love that rearranges your priorities so completely and so permanently that the person you were before it is genuinely difficult to remember. He was 3 years old now, full of energy, full of questions, full of the magnificent, relentless, exhausting curiosity of a child who has just discovered that the world is vast and strange and endlessly interesting, and who sees absolutely no reason not to interrogate every single aspect of it at full volume. He made her laugh every day. He made her tired every day. He made her grateful every day. Not the performed gratitude of someone counting their blessings, but the raw, involuntary gratitude of someone who knows in their marrow that this is the thing that matters. Small but strong, she had never been so sure of anything in her life.
There is a question that every child eventually asks. It arrives differently for different children. Some ask it in the back seat of cars. Some ask it at the dinner table. Some ask it in the blunt, unapologetic way that children have of reaching directly into the heart of the things adults work hardest to avoid. It arrives without warning and with the full, terrible weight of genuine curiosity behind it. Caleb asked it at 3 years old. "Why no daddy?" 3 words, the economy of childhood language applied to the most complicated question in Jessica's life. She had thought about this moment. She had rehearsed answers in the quiet of the warehouse on night shifts, had tried out different versions in her head, the truthful but age-appropriate, the gentle but not dishonest, the answer that would neither burden Caleb with things he was too young to carry, nor leave him with a fiction that would eventually need to be dismantled. She pulled him close. She held him the way she had held him since he was small enough to fit in the crook of her arm, completely, without reservation, the way you hold something you would not survive losing. "Some daddies aren't ready," she said, "but I'm always here." Not a speech, not an explanation, not a performance of strength she did not feel, just the truth, distilled into the simplest possible form, offered with the steadiness of someone who has decided that her child will not grow up in the shadow of bitterness. Caleb considered this, as he considered everything, with the grave, thorough attention of a small philosopher weighing an important argument. Then he wriggled free and went back to whatever he had been doing, satisfied in the way that children are satisfied when they have received a real answer rather than a deflection. Jessica sat for a moment longer than necessary. Money was tight. It had always been tight, and it remained tight with a particular persistence of financial difficulty that is not dramatic, not the crisis kind, not the catastrophe kind, but the quiet, grinding kind that requires constant vigilance and the regular sacrifice of small pleasures. They skipped extras, not with resentment, but with the pragmatic creativity of people who have decided that extra is not required. They found the pleasure in what was present instead of mourning what was absent. Park days became events. Jessica learned the topography of every public park within driving distance, which ones had good climbing structures, which ones had shade in the afternoon, which ones had the kind of open space that allowed a 3-year-old boy to run until he was gloriously, genuinely worn out. She packed lunches in containers she had bought on sale and found every single time that a sandwich eaten outside on a blanket in the sun tasted better than anything she could have paid for in a restaurant. She baked cookies with him on Sunday afternoons. This was not a grand gesture. It was not Instagram content. It was flour on the kitchen counter and Caleb's small hands pressing too hard into the dough, and the specific, irreplaceable satisfaction of watching a child eat something still warm from the oven and declare it the best thing he has ever tasted. She read to him at bedtime, every night without exception, no matter how tired she was. She had decided early that this was non-negotiable, that the ritual of it, the warmth of it, the nightly proof that she was there and he was safe and the world could be trusted, was something she would deliver no matter what the day had cost her. And then, one afternoon at the library, the kind of ordinary afternoon that becomes extraordinary only in retrospect, only when you are writing it down and suddenly see what it meant, she saw Alex. He was across the room. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. The recognition moved across his face in a sequence she had not expected to feel so clinical about. Surprise, then something that might have been longing, and then, unmistakably, guilt. The particular guilt of someone who knows exactly what they left behind and has been doing their best not to think about it. He looked at her. He looked at Caleb. And then he walked away. Jessica watched him go. She did not chase him. She did not call his name. She did not feel the surge of anger she might have expected, might have felt years ago in the rawer, more open wound of the early days. What she felt was something quieter and in its own way more devastating: clarity. She was not the one who had lost something. He was. Caleb laughed at a book. It was a picture book. She could see the bright colors of it from where she stood, and whatever was on the page struck him as the funniest thing he had encountered in his entire 3 years of life. His laugh was enormous. It was the kind of laugh that turns heads and causes strangers to smile without knowing why. The laugh of a child in genuine, total, unperformed delight. Jessica listened to that laugh. She listened to it, and the sound of it was so full, so undiminished, so completely unburdened by what it had not been given, so entirely sufficient in itself, that she felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, not with a cinematic sweep of emotion, just a quiet settling. She was building their world, one tired day at a time, one park day, one batch of cookies, one bedtime story, one honest answer to a hard question at a time. She was building it, and it was real, and it was enough. It was more than enough.
There is a kind of strength that is not made in the absence of difficulty. It is made inside it. It is made in the warehouse at 3 a.m. when every bone in your body wants to stop and you keep going anyway. It is made in the hospital room where the specialists use careful words and you listen and you do not fall apart. Not because you are not afraid, but because falling apart is not something you can afford right now, and you have always been, at your core, someone who does what needs to be done. It is made in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons, covered in flour, watching a small boy press his hands into dough with the focused joy of someone who has no idea how much his mother has given up for this moment and would not need to know because the moment itself is sufficient. It is made in the library, watching your son laugh at a picture book while the man who chose absence walks away with his guilt and understanding, really understanding, in the wordless way that only lived experience can teach, that you are the one who won. Jessica is 27 years old. She is not the girl who pressed her face to the cold window pane and dreamed of ordinary things. She is something more complex than that girl, something that girl did not yet know how to be. She is a woman who has been remade. The dream she carried at 21, the house, the family, the man who stayed, the quiet life in the town where everyone knew your name, that dream did not survive intact. It could not. Dreams rarely do when they meet the specific gravity of real life. They either shatter or transform, and the ones that transform become something neither better nor worse than what they were, but truer, more honest, made of actual material rather than hope alone. Jessica's dream transformed.
The house she imagined became a spare room in her sister's home that slowly became, through the alchemy of love and daily life, the most important place she had ever inhabited. The family she imagined became the two of them, herself and Caleb, which is not the diminishment it might sound like, but rather the distillation of something to its most essential form. The man who stayed became herself. She stayed through the exhaustion and the financial strain and the grief of a future that did not arrive as advertised, and the moment at the library where she looked at the person who had left and felt, finally, something close to pity. She stayed through all of it, not because staying was easy, but because she had looked down at Caleb and understood, in the first moment she ever held him, that leaving was not something she was capable of. Caleb is 3 years old. He asks questions about everything: the sky, the birds, the shapes of clouds, the names of things, the reasons behind the reasons, the endless recursive curiosity of a child who finds the world sufficient to his needs and more. He asks questions that Jessica sometimes cannot answer, and answers that Jessica sometimes cannot believe she is hearing from a 3-year-old. He asked about his father once. He will ask again. Children always do. And when he does, Jessica will be ready with the same quiet truth she offered the first time, because she has decided that her son will not be raised in the shadow of her bitterness or her grief or her longing for a version of events that did not come to pass. He will be raised in the light of what is actually here, a mother who is always here, a love that has never wavered, a world built one tired day at a time from the materials available.
Those materials are, it turns out, more than sufficient. There will be people who look at Jessica's life and see what is missing: the partner, the traditional family structure, the ease that comes with shared resources and shared responsibility. There will be people who see the warehouse job and the skipped extras and the back that aches and the eyes that burn and think, this is a diminished life. This is a life that fell short of what it was supposed to be. Those people are not paying attention. What they would see, if they were paying attention, is a woman who has discovered the outer limits of her own capability and found, to her own astonishment, that those limits are further than she ever knew. What they would see is a child who is not growing up in lack, but in a particular and irreplaceable richness. The richness of a parent who is completely present, completely committed, completely there. What they would see is love doing what love at its very best actually does. Not eliminating difficulty, not making everything easy, not ensuring that life arrives in the shape that was imagined, but sustaining, enduring, making every difficult thing survivable and every good thing luminous. Jessica is building their world, one tired morning at a time, one park day at a time, one batch of cookies at a time, one bedtime story, one answered question, one ordinary Tuesday that becomes, in the living of it, extraordinary. She does not know how the rest of this story goes. Nobody does. She does not know what Caleb will ask her next year, or what she will have to explain, or what new difficulty the world will present her with.
or how she will find the resources, emotional, financial, physical, to meet it.
She knows that she will meet it. She knows this not because she is certain of the outcome, but because she has already met everything that has come before, and she is still here, still standing, still showing up every day for the small, irreplaceable human being who needs her to. Being his mother made her stronger than she ever knew. Not stronger than circumstances required, but stronger than she could have imagined before circumstances revealed to her what she was actually capable of. This is the thing that does not make the news. This is the thing that does not trend online or accumulate millions of views or get celebrated in the ways that more photogenic forms of courage get celebrated. But it is the oldest and most fundamental form of strength in the human story. The strength of someone who decides, in the moment when leaving would be understandable and staying is almost impossible, to stay. Jessica stayed. She is still staying. And in the park on sunny days, when Caleb runs ahead of her with his arms out like wings and his laugh sailing back toward her across the open grass, in those moments that are both entirely ordinary and profoundly, irreducibly sacred, she knows that she would not trade this life for the dream she lost. Not for anything. Not for anything in the world.